If it's a manifesto, if we're trying to call for revolution, it's about challenging existing norms and notions of what a career can look like.
What fuels a multi-passionate life? I'm Jessica Wan, and in this podcast, I interview people who straddle two completely different worlds. I call them Ampersands, and we are collectively designing the Ampersand Manifesto. I'm thrilled to be talking with Shuo Zhai today. Shuo is a double ampersand. He's an architect working with Frank Gehry. He's a professional choral singer in the Los Angeles Master Chorale. And he's an accomplished solo and collaborative pianist. I first got to know Shuo in college in the opera The Magic Flute, where he was the Papageno to my Pamina. A year later, he was my collaborative pianist for my senior recital. Musicians, you already know that being this talented and skillful at two instruments is already a really rare feat. Throughout the years, I've learned that Shuo is full of surprises. After a few years working in finance, he followed his passion for architecture and went to Yale for his master's degree. He now works with Frank Gehry at Gehry Partners, where he's taken on projects ranging from cultural centers and exhibitions to private homes to the recently adopted LA River Master Plan. Since 2015, Shuo has sung with the Grammy Award-winning Los Angeles Master Chorale. You can see him sing live at the Walt Disney Concert Hall in LA, and you can also hear him on movie scores such as Star Wars Episodes 8 and 9. Shuo, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for the really warm welcome intro, and it's so thrilling to be on your show.
When you were a child growing up in Davis, California, what did you imagine your adult life to look like? Could you have guessed that you'd be an architect, singer, and pianist all in one?
Honestly, to this day, I still don't know what the future holds. I still can't guess what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years. So, when I was a kid, I was just trying to not fall off my bike getting to school every day. So, I guess from an early age, I always felt that I had a really strong creative streak. I really loved the visual arts, and I took to music actually quite early. I had actually started playing and studying piano not long after I moved to the States when I was 6. My mom was an avid yard sale hunter. One day she bought me a small keyboard from a yard sale, and I kind of took to it. And so my parents thought, maybe we can get him started on lessons. And so that sort of jump-started the musical development.
Yeah, I can see creativity just really being a thread through a lot of your life. So how have your skills as a pianist deepened your skills as a singer and vice versa?
I think as a pianist, more so as a collaborative pianist and accompanist, working with fabulous singers like yourself, you develop sympathetic breathing. You sort of learn to anticipate the phrase, where it's heading to, anticipate where a phrase might naturally want to end and the singer might need to, take a breath. I guess in that sense, I like to think of my playing as very deeply connected to my experience as a vocal accompanist and as a singer myself.
Yeah, I definitely feel that working with you as a collaborative pianist is just such a joy because, I actually feel like you do breathe with me. I hear myself breathing and you're there with me breathing. And that is such a comfort as a singer to have a pianist like that.
That's great to hear. I would say that sometimes it goes a little too far and I don't trust my singers enough, or even, the string players I work with. Sometimes if they're holding a really long note, I'd be like, do they have enough bow? Do they have enough bow? And so I would want to move things along a little quicker. It depends on the person I'm working with, but it's really, that's kind of the magic of interacting with different people, is you get a sense of kind of their sensibilities as musicians and their limits. So I would say the inverse of that, how my piano playing has affected my singing. A lot of the times when you're in choir, the director tells us to, think more instrumentally. And, I guess what that means is to, within a line that you sing or a shape that you make, always have like an internal metronome, always feel like there's different layers of structure underneath that kind of inform how you make the shape and where the direction of the phrase is heading to. And so the benefit of also being a pianist is that I think in terms of like vertical harmonies and sonorities, as well as linearly in terms of the melodic line. And so I think that's been pretty helpful too. I think the two are very symbiotic. And, one definitely helps me become better at the other.
When you were talking about shapes and verticality, I just couldn't help but think you're an architect and you work with Frank Gehry. And I started really visualizing this all coming together as, as a singer, as a pianist, as an architect. Tell me more about how you work to balance, or how you're in the act of balancing your life as all of these things.
In terms of those things coming together, I think there's definitely a correspondence in terms of shapes and movement and structure, and how you can think of a composition coming together in a certain way with a good balance between certain sections or different elements and textures, with both variety as well as continuity. Those themes in composition definitely carry through in design as well. When you're designing a building or any sort of architectural project, those are sort of the things that are always in the back of your mind. You're thinking about balance, whether the proportion of this space feels right in relation to all the other spaces and in relation to the project as a whole. How can you be thematic with specific architectural elements or material finishes that create a sense of unity as a whole, rather than just like a collection of individual moments, which I think also applies to music and compositions. I've noticed that really, really compelling compositions and the ones that have, endured, they exhibit a lot of the same sort of themes and characteristics that I find also very compelling in the visual arts and architecture.
What a beautiful answer. I'm curious, when you are architecting, for lack of a better word, when you're working on architecture, what do you hear? And similarly with music, when you are working on music, what do you see?
When I'm designing something, I'm not hearing a particular piece of music or particular notes per se, but I guess it's a certain mood. It's a certain kind of undercurrent. It's a certain feeling of energy, ebullience, or peace and calm and like vastness and expansiveness, or tightness and compactness. So it's kind of those types of broader feelings. Sometimes when I'm designing, I would feel that I would need to listen to certain types of music in the background, symphonic music if I'm working on something more large scale, or if it's something kind of more small and whimsical, it might be like some Schumann piano pieces. I don't know. Yeah, I find myself sort of naturally gravitating towards pieces that encapsulate some of those feelings. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a one-to-one correlation.
You started talking about this a little bit, but I'm curious how your two worlds of music and architecture have collided with each other or influenced each other.
I think music was there first, and it was always something that was a common thread through my life, all periods of my life. When I was in college, singing and playing the piano, and then when I was working in finance in Hong Kong, I did some piano recitals, and I was also a part of the Hong Kong Bach choir. And then, at Yale in architecture school, I kept on singing. And so I think music is sort of the creative backbone, I guess, of my life. And it's something that I feel like constantly opens up my eyes to see creative opportunities. And so I think actually music brought me to architecture, not in a direct way, but I think in the way that it kind of cultivates your sensitivity to the world around you, and especially collaborative piano and chamber music, it cultivates your sense of curiosity in other people and your empathy. And so, I feel like those qualities that music has really given me through the years, they're sort of instrumental in opening up my mind to see other creative possibilities and professional opportunities too.
So you were in Hong Kong at the time, working in banking. And I imagine like walking around the city. And Hong Kong is a city that has amazing architecture and is so urban, so dense. Yet, I remember when I was there, there's actually quite a bit of green space. I'm curious how being in Hong Kong influenced your eventual going to Yale, becoming an architect. How did that impact you?
Okay, so I sort of lied. So when I credited music to bringing me to architecture, okay, that's only half true. Actually, Hong Kong was also a huge part of that. It can be both and. So, I guess it became clear after living in Hong Kong for a few years, I found myself, after work or on weekends, really taking every opportunity I can find to go out and explore the city, to walk the streets, to explore the densest parts of the city and how infrastructure and circulation works, and also go to the most remote parts of the city where it's just kind of country park and nature and wilderness. Being in Hong Kong, it's such an extreme and intense city visually and just in terms of like experiencing daily life that I felt like that also really kind of jump started my fascination with architecture and urban design. And so when I decided to apply to architecture school, I spent just several months just being in the city, walking around, documenting a lot of existing urban conditions that I found really interesting, and then sort of finding a way to make those into kind of analysis projects for my design portfolio. That is one of the components that you need to submit as part of your architecture school application. And so architecture was actually provided a lot of the source material for my architecture portfolio. And it was the thing that made it possible for me to get accepted into architecture school and ultimately go to architecture school. Yeah, Hong Kong is an amazing place, and I really feel lucky to have spent a few years there.
And now you're in LA, which feels just about as far from a Hong Kong vibe as possible.
I never thought of myself as an Angelino. I always did, and I still do walk too fast for LA. So, I'm probably more of a New Yorker at the end of the day, but I do really love being here. LA is one of those places that, unlike Hong Kong, which you are immediately allured by, and it's very easy to fall in love with, at first sight. LA, I mean, I guess depending on where you are, it really takes some time to understand how the city works, how the different pieces come together, how you relate to the city. It takes a lot longer to find your community. I feel like a lot of that is because of how the city is structured geographically, as well as culturally. So it really took me maybe a couple of years to really explore enough neighborhoods around the city that I felt like it was finally my city. And I guess a big part of that is finding a musical community, which is, I guess if I look back at other points in my life up to now, it's always been the musical community that has really provided anchor into a place. For me in LA, that's definitely been the Master Chorale. I was really struggling for the first couple of years to find musical life in the city, but the Master Chorale, it's such a confluence of the best singers and musicians in LA, and that is such a powerful brain trust and like such a powerful network, and that has led to so many friendships and so many opportunities professionally as well as just randomly playing music and singing together. So
in your work with the Master Chorale, you have worked with the world's most renowned conductors, including Gustavo Dudamel, Esa-Pekka Salonen, Zubin Mehta. And you've also worked with these illustrious artists like John Williams and Peter Sellers. What have you learned from working with these artists of this caliber and renown? Hi there, listener. I wanted to pause here for a moment so you can reflect on this question. Who's at the top of your field, and what would you like to learn from them? Outside of hosting this podcast, I coach leaders in the workplace to navigate change, thrive in their roles, and stay true to their values. And I love working with ampersands. If any of this sounds interesting to you, reach out to me at jessicawan.com. JESSICAWAN. Now, back to the show. What have you learned from working with these artists of this caliber and renown?
At the end of the day, I've learned that they're just people like you and me. It's easy to get starstruck and to put everyone on a pedestal. And to some extent, they definitely deserve to be by virtue of their accomplishments that are out of this world. But pretty soon you realize that all the masters, Gustavo, Esapeka, even John Williams, it feels like they don't operate on ego. The way they think of themselves is oftentimes very different from the way, we tend to think of celebrities. They're always working. They're always refining their craft. It's never good enough. They're always finding the next project to work on. I think that's a quality that I really respect and that, I would definitely try to emulate. On the architecture side, Frank Gehry, he always half jokes about coming into each project with a healthy dose of insecurity. We tend to think of these towering figures as, infallible or superhuman, but at the end of the day, they're just people trying to do the best that they can. And what has gotten them to that point is persistence and trying different things and just like grit and experience. I mean, these people have been doing what they do. They've been refining their craft for, decades. And that's kind of hopeful to think about, that if we kind of stick to it, then good things will happen.
I love that. Sticking to it and just gaining that experience through work. What fuels you to keep straddling these two worlds of music and architecture, to keep going?
I think, honestly, I'm just a greedy person. I'm like, I'm unable to, or like totally unwilling to give up anything in my life. Sometimes to my detriment. Sometimes I do feel like I'm spreading myself a little thin, but honestly, I think I hate using this word because it's so overused, but like the synergies are just really immeasurable and invaluable between these different pursuits. And I think they keep feeding into each other in ways that benefit sort of the whole ecosystem. And so to me, I think of it as less balancing, even though sometimes it on practical terms, you do need to kind of balance work with, driving an hour and a half to rehearsal, for a production week and, all of that. But, I think of it as just like a part of who I am. And that's something that I just do. And there's not really another way. Like any other way would be not really true to me.
So a recent project of yours is the LA River Master Plan, a reimagining of the 51-mile public open space that runs through 17 municipalities and countless communities in LA. What has your work looked like on this project, and what excites you about it?
Yeah, so I feel like my work on the LA River Master Plan is totally unlike anything in architecture that I've ever done before, or that most architects have an opportunity to work on. It's really a synthesis of so much, and it's really thinking on a much larger scale than we typically do, and it has much more impact on the community than the projects that we typically work on, just in terms of scale and the sheer number of opportunities it creates and the people that it benefits. And so I think that's really one of the most exciting parts of the project, is to work on something that is so kind of vital to the long range planning and well-being of the city that you live in and knowing that you've contributed to the city in a very kind of tangible way. I feel like through the project and its sheer scale and scope, I've really become more plugged into the city. And I love that. It's really helped root me to LA in that sense. And it's given me a really valuable understanding of kind of how the city works and operates and kind of the different entities and players, at the county level and at the city level.
And how long is this project going to kind of take? Is it going to be rolled out in stages?
What was recently adopted by the LA County Board of Supervisors is the 2020 update to the LA River Master Plan. So the last time there was a master plan, it was in 1996. And of course, since then, there's been much more information and data and knowledge as it relates to kind of climate and ecosystems and demographics and flood risk management. And so this is something that will be in place for the next 20, 25 years. So conceivably in 2040 or 2050, there might be another master plan. But what the 2020 master plan seeks to do is set the framework for improvements that benefit communities up and down the 51 miles of the river for the next, I would say, 10, 20 years.
A huge impact. So you talked a little bit before about how the Master Chorale has really become your home in LA and your community. And when you think about friendships that you've made with musicians, how much of it is about the music itself? How much of it is about shared experiences or really just a shared mindset?
I think music brings musicians together, but oftentimes, you stay friends because of a shared mindset or kind of a shared set of sensibilities or, experiences. So I think of some of my best friends in LA. Yeah, we met through singing or chamber music, and that's still a big part of, the basis for our friendship, but it's just a start. And I feel like through music, you get to know somebody so well as a person when you play with them, when you work on a recital with them. It's an important bonding experience. And that in itself creates a strong foundation for a friendship.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. What advice do you have for people who are pursuing or thinking of pursuing the ampersand lifestyle?
Okay. I would say that the benefits of pursuing and sustaining an ampersand lifestyle far outweigh, any disadvantages or juggling acts or fear of spreading yourself too thin, which, to me, to this day, still in the back of my mind, sometimes, I have those fears and thoughts is if I just focused on music or singing or architecture, I might be really, really good at this thing much faster. And I might get to somewhere in my career much faster than I would have if I tried to sustain the ampersand lifestyle. I think at the end of the day, I guess it's not really about how quickly I get there. It's not really, about the destination either. It's just by doing what I love, by doing architecture, by doing music, I'm kind of living a life that I love. And I just have to trust that by doing what I feel is true to me and that makes me happy at this moment, it'll lead to the best version of me down the road.
What else do you think should be in the ampersand manifesto?
We're all human beings. We are not defined by our professions. We are very rich and complex individuals with a wealth of different experiences that shape us and kind of inform who we are. And I think by being an ampersand, kind of you're honoring your person as a whole. And you're really, being intentional and fearless about making a choice to fulfill your full potential as, a human being and to, honor yourself. If it's a manifesto, if we're trying to like call for revolution, it's about challenging existing norms and notions of what a career can look like. For so long, it's, I feel like, especially in this country, you meet someone and the first thing you would ask them is, what do you do? And then you would expect to hear, I'm a doctor or a lawyer, but just kind of one thing. I think people tend to be uncomfortable with complexity or ambiguity, but really, I think kind of we all owe it to ourselves to acknowledge like our richness and our potential, and to find ways, starting with ourselves, to redefine our work and shape it in a way that reflects all parts of ourselves.
Shuo, it's been such a pleasure talking with you today. Folks, you can check out Shuo on Instagram. His handle is his name, Shuo Zhai. That's ShuoZhai. If you liked this podcast, hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends and fellow ampersands. I had a chance to reflect on my interview with Shuo and found myself coming back to a few key takeaways. 1. Before this interview, I hadn't thought deeply about the parallels between music and architecture. Shuo shared with me this quote from the 18th century writer Goethe. Music is liquid architecture. Architecture is frozen music. I thought this was a really beautiful way of thinking about how forms of expression all share a common foundation. The second takeaway is around reinvention and how a major pivot, such as moving from finance to architecture, can launch you into a new city, a new community, and new opportunities. But you have to be open to change. Lastly, I really connected with Shuo in his deep respect for music and all that it's given him. Franz Schubert famously wrote a song called An die Musik, which means to music, in which he expresses his thanks and his love for the art of music. I've been thinking about this a lot. How much my curiosity as a coach might have been shaped by my musical practice, how music has taught me about leadership and teamwork, and how making music has been one of the best forms of self-care and mental wellness for me.
On paper, some things don't seem possible, but in reality, I'm often surprised by how often it is possible. Go Ampersands!